He was told his grandmother left him nothing but debt. When he aged out of the system, he went back to the only home he'd ever known. And what he found buried in the walls would expose a lie that had stolen his past and threatened to destroy his future. If you've ever felt like your own story was taken from you, then stick around. Hit that subscribe button, because this is for you. The air in the director's office at St. Jude's Home for Boys always smelled the same: lemon polish, old paper, and the faint metallic scent of regret. I'd been breathing it in for 6 years, ever since the accident. Today, on my 18th birthday, I was breathing it for the last time. Mr. Henderson, a man whose tired eyes had seen hundreds of boys like me come and go, slid a thin manila envelope across his desk. It landed with a soft, final thud. "Well, Leo," he said, his voice a gravelly monotone, "this is it. You're a man now, in the eyes of the state." A man. I didn't feel like a man. I felt like a collection of faded memories and institutional habits. I knew how to make my bed with military corners, how to eat a meal in under 4 minutes, and how to make myself invisible in a crowded room. I wasn't sure if any of that qualified me for manhood. I picked up the envelope. Inside was a one-way bus ticket to the city, $312 in cash, my accumulated state allowance, and a single folded document. It was a summary of probate for the estate of Eleanor Vance, my grandmother. "Your brother Ethan was the executor," Mr. Henderson explained, already looking past me toward the next file on his desk. "He handled everything after your grandmother passed, right after you two came here. According to this, the property was heavily mortgaged. After all the debts were settled, there was nothing left. The farm was sold to a development company, Viridian Holdings." I stared at the black and white letters on the page. Sold. Nothing left. The words felt like stones dropping into a deep, empty well. The farm wasn't just a piece of land. It was the only real home I'd ever known. It was the smell of damp earth after a summer rain, the rough texture of a calf's tongue against my hand, the low hum of my grandmother's voice as she read to me by the fire. It was the place where I was safe. "Ethan handled it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I hadn't seen my brother in over 4 years. After he turned 18, he'd vanished. No calls, no letters. He'd left me here just as surely as our parents had. He was the next of kin, of legal age once things got moving. "It's all official, Leo, all closed." Mr. Henderson stood up, a clear signal that our time was done. He offered a perfunctory handshake. His palm was dry and cool. "Good luck out there. Try to make good choices." I walked out of his office, the envelope feeling heavy in my hand, heavier than the worn duffel bag slung over my shoulder. The bag contained everything I owned: 3 sets of clothes, a worn copy of a book my grandmother had given me, and a small, smooth riverstone I'd kept in my pocket since the day I left the farm. In the hallway, the younger boys watched me, their faces a mixture of envy and fear. I was free. But free to do what? Go where? The bus station was a chaotic swirl of noise and exhaust fumes. I looked at my ticket. It was for a bus heading south to a city where I knew no one. The $300 in my pocket felt like both a fortune and an insult. It was supposed to be the seed money for my new life, but it felt more like severance pay for a childhood that had ended too soon. I stood there under the flickering fluorescent lights, the ticket in one hand and the probate summary in the other. Viridian Holdings. The name sounded cold and sterile, like a surgical instrument. I tried to picture the farm being bulldozed, replaced by rows of identical houses with manicured lawns. The thought was a physical pain, a sharp twisting in my gut. Something felt wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. My grandmother was not a careless woman. She loved that land. She used to say it was in her bones, that the soil and her blood were one and the same. She would never have let it fall into so much debt that it would have to be sold to strangers. She was frugal, careful. She saved string and reused tea bags. The story didn't fit the woman I knew. And Ethan, my brother, had always been different. Where I was quiet, he was loud. Where I was content, he was restless. He had a hunger in him, a desperate need for more. He'd always resented the farm, called it a dirt prison. He wanted the city, the money, the life he saw in magazines. The idea of him being in charge of our grandmother's final wishes felt like letting a fox guard the henhouse. I looked from the bus ticket in my hand to the departures board. A different bus was leaving in 20 minutes. The sign above it read, Northwood. It was the closest town to the farm. It was a bus heading into the past, not the future. Mr. Henderson's voice echoed in my head. Make good choices. Maybe a good choice wasn't always the one that moved you forward. Maybe sometimes it was the one that took you back to the beginning, to the place where the story first went wrong. I walked over to the ticket counter, the crumpled probate summary in my fist. I slid the southbound ticket back to the clerk. I've changed my mind, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I need a ticket to Northwood. The bus ride to Northwood was a journey through a landscape of memories. With every mile that passed, the concrete and steel of the city gave way to rolling hills and wide-open skies. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the world I'd been separated from for 6 years slowly return. I saw fields of corn, their tassels waving in the breeze. I saw lone oak trees standing silhouetted against the horizon, their branches like veins in the sky. Each image was a key, unlocking a door in my mind. I remembered my grandmother Eleanor teaching me how to read the clouds. "See that one, Leo?" she'd say, her finger pointing upwards. "That's a mare's tail, means weather's on the way." She taught me the names of the birds by their songs, the trees by their bark. She believed that the land spoke a language, and if you were quiet enough, you could learn to understand it. Ethan never had the patience for it. He was always looking for a signal on his phone, complaining about the slow internet, dreaming of a world that moved faster than the seasons. He and our grandmother loved each other, but they were tuned to different frequencies. He saw the farm as a dead end. She saw it as the whole world. The accident changed everything. A foggy morning, a slick patch of road, our parents gone in an instant. Ethan and I were sent to live with our grandmother. For 2 years, she was our anchor. She held us together with gentle hands and fierce love, even as her own heart was breaking. But the grief took its toll. Her health, already fragile, began to fail. One afternoon, she collapsed in the garden. When the ambulance came, Ethan and I were left standing in the driveway, 2 small boys watching our entire world being driven away. She died in the hospital a week later. We were sent to St. Jude's. The bus rumbled over a familiar bridge, and my heart lurched. We were close. I saw the old water tower with Northwood painted in peeling white letters. The town hadn't changed. The same brick storefronts lined Main Street, the same sleepy diner on the corner, the same hardware store with a rusty tractor out front. It was a town caught in amber, a place time had mostly forgotten. I was the only one who got off at the small depot. The driver gave me a curious look as he handed me my duffel bag. "You sure this is your stop, son?" he asked. "I'm sure," I said, pulling the collar of my jacket up against a sudden wind. The farm was 5 miles out of town. I could have tried to call a cab, but there was only one in Northwood, and I didn't want to talk to anyone yet. I wanted to walk. I needed the time, the distance, to prepare myself for what I might find, or what I might not. The walk was long. The sun beat down on my neck, and the asphalt was hot through the thin soles of my state-issued shoes. With each step, the memories grew more vivid. more painful. I remembered racing Ethan down this very road on our bikes, his laughter echoing as he always pulled ahead. I remembered my grandmother driving her old pickup truck, her arm resting on the open window, waving as she passed. As I rounded the final bend, I saw it. The mailbox leaning sideways, its door hanging open like a broken jaw, and behind it the long gravel driveway, overgrown with weeds. But it was the sign that stopped me cold. It was nailed to one of the old gateposts, its bold red letters stark against the weathered wood. Property of Viridian Holdings, no trespassing. The sign was real. The document in my pocket wasn't just paper, it was a fact hammered into the entrance of my home. But something else was wrong. The sign was faded, streaked with rust from the nails, and beyond it, the land wasn't developed. There were no construction vehicles, no surveyors' flags, no half-finished frames of new houses. There was just silence. The fields were fallow, choked with thistle and Queen Anne's lace. The farmhouse, visible in the distance, looked quiet and dark. If a development company had bought it, why had they let it sit here and rot for years? A cold knot of dread and curiosity tightened in my stomach. The story wasn't just wrong, it was incomplete. I ducked under the rusty barbed wire fence, ignoring the sign. The gravel crunched under my feet as I started up the long driveway. I was trespassing on the only home I had ever known. The closer I got to the house, the more my heart ached. The place wasn't just empty, it was wounded. The white paint was peeling off in long strips, revealing the gray, weathered wood beneath. Shutters hung crookedly from the windows, and the porch steps sagged in the middle. The rose bushes my grandmother had so carefully tended were now a tangled, thorny mess climbing wild against the walls. It looked like a place that had lost its soul. I walked onto the porch, the boards groaning under my weight. The front door was padlocked, a heavy industrial lock that didn't belong. I peered through a grimy window into the living room. It was empty. The furniture was gone, all of it. The big, comfortable armchair where my grandmother read, the sturdy oak table where we ate our meals, the hand-hooked rugs she'd made. Everything had been stripped away. All that was left was dust and shadows. Anger, hot and sharp, pierced through my numbness. This wasn't just a sale, it was a desecration. Ethan hadn't just given away the land. He'd erased our life here. He'd sold the memories, the history, for whatever cash he could get. I circled the house, my fists clenched. I tried the back door, also locked. The windows were boarded up from the inside. It felt like a tomb. I was about to give up, to turn around and walk back to town with nothing but the confirmation of my loss, when I remembered the cellar. On the north side of the house, hidden behind a lattice screen thick with overgrown ivy, was a pair of slanted cellar doors. It was how we used to sneak in and out of the house as kids when we were supposed to be in bed. I pulled back the thorny ivy, my hands getting scratched, and found the old iron handle. I pulled. It was stiff with rust and disuse, but with a great groaning screech, one of the doors lifted. A wave of cool, musty air washed over me. It was the smell of damp earth, stored apples, and thyme. I swung my legs over the edge and dropped down onto the hard, packed dirt floor. For a moment I just stood there in the semi-darkness, letting my eyes adjust. Light filtered in through a single dirty window high on the stone foundation. The cellar was just as I remembered it. Shelves lined with empty canning jars, old tools hanging from pegs, a dusty wine press in the corner. Nothing of value. Nothing anyone would have bothered to take. I felt my way to the wooden staircase that led up into the kitchen. The door at the top was barred from the other side. Blocked, my hope sank. But as my hand rested on the rough wood of the door, my fingers brushed against a loose nail. It was our old signal, a single nail left slightly proud of the wood. It meant one of us had left the main kitchen lock undone. It was a childish habit, a secret code from a lifetime ago. Could it be possible? With a surge of adrenaline, I shoved my shoulder against the door. It didn't budge. I tried again, putting all my weight into it. The bar on the other side groaned. It was probably just a simple wooden plank dropped into a pair of brackets. I took a few steps back, took a deep breath, and charged. My shoulder hit the door with a loud crack. The wood splintered around the bar, and the door flew open, sending me stumbling into the kitchen. I stood there, panting, in the heart of my grandmother's house. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay. Sunlight streamed through the dirty windows, illuminating millions of dancing dust motes. The room was as barren as the living room. The big cast-iron stove was cold. The cupboards hung open, empty. I walked through the house like a ghost, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Each room was a fresh wound. The small bedroom Ethan and I had shared, with scratches on the wall marking our height. The living room, where the faint outline of my grandmother's armchair was still visible in the dust on the floor. It was all gone. Finally, I came to her room. It was the simplest room in the house, with a bed, a dresser, and a small bookshelf. Like the others, it was empty. The mattress was gone. The drawers of the dresser were pulled out. I sank down onto the floor, the full weight of my loss crashing down on me. It was true. Everything was gone. My pilgrimage here had been for nothing. I had come looking for a piece of my past, and all I'd found was an empty shell. I sat there for a long time, the silence pressing in on me. I ran my hand over the dusty floorboards, tracing the patterns in the old wood. My fingers snagged on the edge of the braided rug that still lay in the center of the room. It was one of the few things left behind, probably because it was too old and worn to be worth anything. I remembered my grandmother sitting on the floor, her fingers skillfully weaving the colorful scraps of fabric together. "Nothing is ever wasted, Leo," she used to say. "You can always make something beautiful out of the pieces." I tugged at the edge of the rug, not really knowing why. It was heavy, stiff with age. As I pulled it back, my fingers brushed against an uneven edge on the floorboard beneath it. I looked closer. One of the planks was slightly raised, its nail head sitting higher than the others. My heart started to beat a little faster. I remembered stories she used to tell about the old days, about people hiding their valuables under the floor. My fingers were too thick to get a grip on the board. I went back down to the cellar and returned with a rusty pry bar. I wedged the flat end into the crack and leaned on it. The old wood creaked in protest, then with a sharp crack, the nails pulled free. I lifted the plank. Underneath, nestled in the dark, cool space between the floor joists, was a small tin box. It was an old biscuit tin, its painted flowers faded and chipped. It wasn't locked. My hands were trembling as I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was a thick bundle of letters tied together with a piece of butcher's twine. They were addressed to me in my grandmother's elegant looping script. Beneath the letters was a heavy canvas pouch that clinked when I touched it, and under that a single thick envelope, sealed with wax. On the front, in the same familiar handwriting, were the words, "For Ms. Albright, a friend in Northwood." I carefully lifted the letters out. They felt sacred, a message from another world. I untied the twine and looked at the first one. The date on it was from the week before she died. My breath caught in my throat. I sat down on the dusty floor, leaned my back against the wall, and began to read. "My dearest Leo," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and the world has not been as kind to you as I would have wished. I hope with all my heart that you find this before too much time has passed. I am writing this because I am afraid, not of dying. I am old and tired, and I am ready to see your grandfather again. I am afraid for you." My eyes filled with tears, blurring the words. I wiped them away with the back of my hand and kept reading. Her voice was so clear on the page, I could almost hear her speaking the words aloud. I have not been well, and I fear I don't have much time. I must be honest with you about your brother. I love Ethan Leo, you know I do, but there is a shadow in him, a hunger that frightens me. He talks of money, of leaving this place, of all the things he feels he is owed. He looks at this farm not as a home, but as a cage made of assets. I have tried to teach him, to show him the value in a life tied to the land, but his heart is elsewhere. She wrote about the will. She explained that her lawyer had drawn up a simple, clear document leaving the farm and all its assets to me, not to both of us, to me. I have done this not because I love you more, she wrote, but because you love this place more. For you, this farm is a legacy. For Ethan, it is a stepping stone. I have set up a trust. For him, a modest amount of money that will be his when he turns 21. It is enough for a start in the city he so desires, but the land, the home, it must be for you, Leo. You have the soul of a caretaker. You will protect it. Then came the part that made the air go thin in my lungs. I have told Ethan of my intentions. His reaction confirmed my fears. The anger in his eyes was cold. He said I was choosing you over him, that I was betraying him. I am afraid of what he might do when I am gone. He is clever and he can be convincing. I have a terrible feeling that he will try to take this from you. That is why I have hidden this box. The official will is with my lawyer. But this, my Leo, this is the truth. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. I read the letter again, and then a third time. The words burned into my mind. The probate summary was a lie, a forgery. Ethan had done it. He had waited until our grandmother was gone, and then he had stolen my home, my inheritance, my entire past, and sold it for a pittance to some faceless company. He had left me in an orphanage for 6 years, knowing he had taken everything from me. The grief I'd been carrying for years curdled into a hot, bitter rage. It was a rage so pure and so intense it made me shake. It was a rage for the little boy left alone at St. Jude's, for the grandmother whose last wishes had been spat on, for the land that was now lying fallow and forgotten. I opened the canvas pouch. It was full of cash, old bills carefully bundled. I didn't count it, but it looked like thousands of dollars. It was her emergency fund, the money she kept hidden away for a crisis. It was a final gift, a final act of protection, a way to give me a fighting chance. I picked up the last envelope, the one addressed to Ms. Albright, a friend in Northwood. This was the key. My grandmother hadn't just left me the truth. She had left me a path, a way to fight back. But as I sat there on the floor of that empty, violated house, the rage began to cool, replaced by a chilling wave of despair. What could I possibly do? I was an 18-year-old with no family, no resources beyond the cash in this bag, and a story that sounded like something out of a book. Against me was a legal document filed with the state, a powerful development company, and my own brother. Who would believe me? The system had already accepted Ethan's version of the story. Mr. Henderson's words came back to me. It's all official, all closed. I felt impossibly small. The weight of the house, the years of neglect, the scale of the betrayal, it all pressed down on me. For a moment, the easiest thing in the world seemed to be to take the cash, walk away, and never look back. I could go to that city, the one on my original bus ticket. I could get an apartment, a job. I could try to build a life from scratch, a life free from the ghosts of this place. I could let the lie stand. It would be safer. It would be simpler. I could just survive. Listen, if you've made it this far, maybe you know what this feels like. To be standing at a crossroads where one path is easy and the other feels impossible. to have your own story told back to you wrong, twisted by someone you were supposed to trust, to have someone else define your past, to have them tell you what you are owed and what you have lost. It's a heavy thing to carry. It makes you want to just drop it all and run. If you're carrying something like that right now, if you're facing that kind of choice, I want you to know you're not alone. We're building a community here for people who get it, for people who know that sometimes the hardest fight is the one for your own truth. Hit that subscribe button and let's get back to the story, because sitting there in that dusty room, I realized my grandmother hadn't just left me a problem, she had left me a choice. I sat there on that floor for what felt like hours, the sun slanting lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the room. The cash in the pouch was a solid, tempting weight in my lap. It represented a future, an anonymous, uncomplicated future. No lawyers, no fight, no dredging up the past. I could walk out of this house and leave the ghosts behind. I could let Viridian Holdings have the land. I could let Ethan have his victory. It would hurt, but it would be a clean break. But then I looked at the letters in my other hand, at my grandmother's looping script. I read the last line of that first letter again. You have the soul of a caretaker. You will protect it. She hadn't written, I hope you will protect it. She had written, you will protect it. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of faith. She had looked at the quiet, observant boy I was, and she had seen a fighter. She had believed in a strength in me that I had never seen in myself. For 6 years in St. Jude's, my only goal had been to survive, to be invisible, to not make waves. I had learned to be passive. But my grandmother had known someone else, someone who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, to stand his ground. To walk away now would be to betray her memory more profoundly than Ethan ever could. He had betrayed her wishes out of greed. I would be betraying her faith out of fear, and somehow that felt worse. I made my choice. I carefully folded the letters and placed them in my jacket pocket. I put the cash back in the pouch and tucked it deep inside my duffel bag. I picked up the sealed envelope addressed to Ms. Albright. It felt solid, important. It was my only weapon. Leaving the farmhouse felt different this time. It was no longer a tomb of memories. It was a battlefield. It was something to be reclaimed. I walked back down the long driveway, my shoulders straighter, my steps more certain. I was no longer just a boy who had aged out of the system. I was a grandson with a promise to keep. Back in Northwood, the town was quiet. The afternoon sun gave the old brick buildings a warm glow. I stopped the first person I saw, an older woman watering the petunias in a window box outside the bakery. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said. "I'm looking for a Ms. Albright." She looked me up and down, her expression kind but curious. "Sarah Albright, the lawyer?" "I think so," I said, my heart leaping. "The envelope just says Ms. Albright." "Well, there's only one," she said with a smile. "Her office is just up there, above the diner. Has been for 40 years. The diner was a classic small-town spot with a neon sign advertising fresh pie. A narrow, steep staircase was tucked into the side of the building. A small brass plaque next to the door read, "S. Albright, Attorney at Law." I took a deep breath and climbed the stairs. The office was a single, cluttered room, smelling of old books and brewing coffee. It was filled with towering stacks of files and legal volumes. Behind a massive oak desk sat a woman who looked to be in her late 60s. She had sharp, intelligent eyes behind a pair of reading glasses, and her white hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She looked up as I entered, her expression neutral. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice clear and firm. "Are you Ms. Albright?" "I am." I hesitated for a moment, then walked forward and placed the sealed envelope on her desk. "My name is Leo Vance," I said. "My grandmother, Eleanor Vance, left this for you." Her eyes widened slightly at the mention of my grandmother's name. She picked up the envelope, her fingers examining the wax seal. She looked from the envelope to my face, really looking at me for the first time. A flicker of recognition, or maybe just memory, crossed her features. "Eleanor's grandson," she said softly. "My goodness, I haven't seen you since you were just a boy." She took a silver letter opener from a cup on her desk and slit the envelope with practiced precision. She unfolded the thick pages within and began to read. I stood there in silence, watching her face. I saw her expression shift from professional curiosity to shock, then to a quiet, simmering anger. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the pages. When she finally looked up, her sharp eyes were filled with a fierce, new light. "I knew it," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "I knew something wasn't right about that boy." She looked at me directly. "Your grandmother was a dear friend, and she was one of the shrewdest women I've ever known. When your brother came to me after her death with a different will, one that named him sole heir and executor, I questioned it. It was typed, not in her hand, and the signature looked off. But he had a notary's stamp and a story about her changing her mind at the last minute, about wanting to free you from the burden of the farm. He was convincing. I fought it, but I had no proof. The court accepted it." She tapped the letter on her desk. "This changes things. This is her voice, her intent, but it's not enough on its own. What we need is the original will she mentions." She looked at me, a question in her eyes. "I don't have it," I said, my hopes starting to fade. "It wasn't in the box." Ms. Albright smiled, a thin, determined line. "No, dear boy, it wouldn't have been. Your grandmother was clever. She wouldn't hide the official document in her own house. She was afraid Ethan would tear the place apart looking for it." She stood up and walked over to a large black safe in the corner of the room. She spun the dial with a series of loud, satisfying clicks and swung the heavy door open. From a drawer inside, she pulled out a long, crisp envelope, identical to the one I had just given her, sealed with the same wax stamp. It was addressed to her. On the back, in my grandmother's hand, were instructions, to be opened only upon receipt of a matching letter delivered by the hand of my grandson, Leo Vance. She opened it. Inside was the true will, a simple handwritten document, each line filled with my grandmother's love and foresight, signed in her unmistakable script. It left the farm to me. It detailed the trust for Ethan. It was all there. "This," Ms. Albright said, holding the document like it was a holy relic, "is our weapon." She looked at me, her eyes blazing with purpose. "But you need to understand, Leo, this is going to be a war. Viridian Holdings will not give up that land easily. They have a deed of sale signed by your brother. They will claim they are a good faith purchaser, and your brother, we will have to prove he committed fraud, forgery. It can be a long, ugly, and expensive process." "I have some money," I said, thinking of the cash in my bag. "My grandmother left it." She waved a dismissive hand. "Keep it. You'll need it to live on. I'll take this case pro bono for Eleanor." She paused, her gaze steady and serious. "But you have to be sure. They will try to bury us in paperwork. They may try to intimidate you. They will offer you money to go away. Are you ready for that?" I thought of the empty house, the overgrown fields, the faith my grandmother had placed in me. "I'm ready," I said, and for the first time in my life, I felt the unwavering certainty of the words. "It's my home." The first shot in the war was a letter from Ms. Albright to Viridian Holdings. It was a formal legal document that laid out our claim, attaching a copy of the true will and an affidavit from me. We were asserting that the sale of the property was based on a fraudulent title and was therefore void. The response came a week later, not in a letter but in a car. A sleek black sedan that looked completely out of place, parked on the dusty main street of Northwood. A man in a suit that cost more than I'd ever had to my name walked into Ms. Albright's office. His name was Mr. Davies, and he was an in-house lawyer for Viridian. He was smooth, polished, and had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He didn't threaten, he didn't bluster, he sympathized. He spoke of the unfortunate family dispute and the terrible position I was in. He explained that Viridian had purchased the property legally, based on a will certified by the county court. They were, in his words, an innocent party in all of this. Then came the offer. "Our company is not without a heart, Mr. Vance," he said, leaning forward in his chair. "We are prepared to offer you a settlement to help you get on your feet. A gesture of goodwill, $50,000. All you have to do is sign this document, relinquishing any and all future claims to the property." $50,000. The number hung in the air, shimmering. It was an astronomical sum. It was a new life, handed to me on a silver platter. I could go anywhere, do anything. It was the easy path, the safe path, laid out right in front of me. I looked at Ms. Albright. Her face was like stone, giving nothing away. The choice was mine. I thought about the money. I thought about the freedom it could buy. Freedom from this fight, from this town, from the weight of the past. But then I thought about what it would cost. It would cost the rustle of the wind in the oak trees, the feel of the rich, dark soil in my hands, the view of the sunset from the porch. It would cost my grandmother's faith in me. "The land is not for sale," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Mr. Davies's smile tightened just a fraction. "Perhaps you're not understanding the situation, son. We have the deed. The law is on our side. This offer is more than generous. If you force this to court, you will spend years of your life and walk away with nothing but legal bills." "The will your company based its purchase on was a forgery," Ms. Albright cut in, her tone like ice. "That makes your deed worthless. The only thing you purchased was a lawsuit. Now my client has given you his answer. The offer is rejected." Davies stood up, his polished demeanor cracking slightly. He gave me a long, hard look. "You're making a big mistake, kid," he said, before turning and walking out of the office. The moment the door closed, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands were shaking. Ms. Albright put a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Leo. Now the real work begins." While Ms. Albright filed the official lawsuit, I moved into the farmhouse. It felt strange and defiant, like I was an occupying force on my own land. The cash my grandmother had left was enough to get the electricity and water turned back on, and to buy a cheap mattress, some basic tools, and groceries. The first few weeks were lonely and overwhelming. The house was a wreck. Dust was thick on every surface, the plumbing was leaky, and at night the wind whistled through cracks in the window frames. I spent my days cleaning, patching, and repairing. I scrubbed the floors until the original wood gleamed. I re-glued the peeling wallpaper. I replaced the broken panes of glass. With each small act of repair, I felt like I was not just fixing the house, but fixing something broken inside myself. I was reclaiming it, one nail, one scrub brush, one act of care at a time. The land was an even bigger challenge. The fields were a jungle of weeds. The fences were down. The barn roof had a hole in it the size of a small car. I started with the area around the house, pulling weeds until my hands were raw, mowing the overgrown lawn with a rusty push mower I found in the shed. Slowly the town started to notice. Mr. Gable, who ran the hardware store, started giving me discounts on supplies. "Your grandmother was a good customer," he'd say with a gruff nod, "and a good woman." One afternoon, an old pickup truck rumbled up my driveway. An elderly man with a face like a road map and hands like gnarled oak roots got out. He introduced himself as Carl, a farmer from the next property over. "I used to help your grandmother with the haying," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Hated to see this place go to seed. The engine on that old tractor of hers is probably seized up, but I reckon we could get it running." The next day, he came back with his toolbox, and the day after that. We spent a week tinkering with the old machine, and when its engine finally coughed to life, with a plume of black smoke, the sound was the sweetest music I'd ever heard. Carl taught me how to plow, how to read the soil. He never asked for anything in return. "Neighbors help neighbors," was all he'd say. The community my grandmother had been a part of was slowly, quietly wrapping its arms around me. They were people who understood the language of the land, who knew that a home was more than just a structure or an asset. They were my allies in a fight I didn't even know they were watching. One evening, after a long day of mending fences, I was sitting on the porch steps, watching the fireflies begin to blink in the twilight. A car pulled up. Not a black sedan, but a beat-up compact car I didn't recognize. A man got out. As he walked toward the house, my whole body went rigid. It was Ethan. He looked different, thinner. The arrogant swagger I remembered was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. He was wearing clothes that were trying to look expensive, but were just cheap imitations. "Leo," he said, stopping at the bottom of the steps. He couldn't quite meet my eyes. I didn't say anything. I just watched him, the silence stretching between us, thick with 6 years of betrayal. I heard you were back," he stammered. "I got a call from a lawyer, from Viridian." "What do you want, Ethan?" I asked, my voice flat and cold. "Look, I messed up, okay?" he said, the words rushing out. "I was a kid. I was stupid. I thought that money was my ticket out. I thought it was what I deserved." "What you deserved," I stood up, the rage I'd felt in that empty room coming back, hot and sharp. "You deserved to spit on her memory, to forge her name, to steal my home and leave me to rot in an institution for 6 years while you ran off with blood money." He flinched. "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," I shouted, my voice echoing in the quiet evening air. "Did you ever once think of me, Ethan? Did you ever think of coming back? Or were you too busy spending the 30 pieces of silver you got for selling our entire lives?" He finally looked at me, and in his eyes I didn't see a monster. I saw something worse. I saw a weak, pathetic man, terrified of the consequences of his own actions. "They're going to sue me," he whispered. "Viridian. They said if they lose the property, they're coming after me for the money I was paid. They're going to press criminal charges for fraud. Leo, you can't let them do that. I'll go to jail." He was asking me to save him. After everything he had done, he was standing on my porch, on the land he had stolen, and asking me to protect him. "You have to call it off," he pleaded. "Take the settlement. We can split it. It's more than enough. Please, Leo, I'm your brother." "My brother," I said, the words tasting like ash. "My brother wouldn't have done this." I looked at his desperate, frightened face, and I felt nothing. The anger was gone, burned out. All that was left was a vast, empty pity. He wasn't the cunning villain I had imagined. He was just a scared, greedy boy who had made a terrible choice and had been running from it ever since. "Go away, Ethan," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I turned my back on him and walked into the house, closing the door behind me. I didn't watch him leave. The confrontation I had dreaded for months was over, and it hadn't been a dramatic explosion. It had been a quiet, sad fizzle. It was the final closing of a door that had been left ajar for 6 long years. I was truly on my own now, and I was okay with that. The legal battle dragged on for almost a year. It was exactly as Ms. Albright had predicted. Viridian's lawyers tried to bury us in motions, depositions, and delays. They questioned my memory, my motivations, my character. They tried to paint my grandmother as a fickle old woman who was easily confused. They tried to make me out to be a bitter, vindictive young man trying to extort money from an innocent corporation. Through it all, Ms. Albright was my rock. She was relentless. meticulously dismantling their arguments, presenting our evidence with unshakable confidence. The community was my foundation. Carl helped me plant a small crop of winter wheat. Mrs. Gable from the bakery started dropping off a fresh loaf of bread on my porch every Saturday morning. The quiet support of these people who owed me nothing was a constant source of strength. It was a reminder of what I was fighting for, not just a piece of property, but a place in a community, a connection to something real. I poured all my energy, all my anger, and all my hope into the farm. I repaired the barn roof, patched the plaster in the living room, and sanded and refinished the old wooden floors until they shone. I found my grandmother's journals in a box in the attic and read her entries about the seasons, the crops, the small joys and sorrows of a life lived in harmony with the land. I was getting to know her all over again, and in doing so, I was getting to know myself. The day of the final court hearing was gray and overcast, the sky threatening rain. I sat next to Ms. Albright at the plaintiff's table, my best shirt feeling stiff and unfamiliar. Across the aisle, Mr. Davies sat with a team of lawyers looking confident and unconcerned. Ethan wasn't there. He had been subpoenaed, but his lawyer claimed he was out of state and unreachable. He had run, just like he always did. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Miller, listened patiently as both sides presented their final arguments. Viridian's lawyer told a story of a simple real estate transaction, a legal purchase based on court-certified documents. Ms. Albright told a story of a grieving boy, a dying grandmother's wish, and a profound betrayal. She presented the two wills, the letters, the testimony of a handwriting expert who confirmed the signature on Ethan's will was a forgery. When it was all over, Judge Miller sat in silence for a long time, looking over the documents. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the clock on the wall ticking. My heart hammered against my ribs. My entire future was hanging on this moment. Finally, she looked up, her gaze settling on me. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice clear and carrying, "the court has reviewed all the evidence presented. It is the finding of this court that the will submitted by Ethan Vance was, in fact, a fraudulent document. The signature of the deceased was forged." A collective gasp went through the small public gallery where Carl and a few other locals had come to show their support. Therefore, the judge continued, the sale of the Vance property to Viridian Holdings, being based on a fraudulent title, is hereby declared null and void. Title of the property is restored to its rightful heir, as stipulated in the true and final will of Eleanor Vance, her grandson, Leo Vance. I didn't move. I couldn't. The words washed over me, but they didn't seem real. Ms. Albright squeezed my arm, a huge smile breaking across her face. "We did it, Leo," she whispered. "We won." It was over. I had my home back. As we walked out of the courthouse, the clouds broke and the sun streamed through. It felt like a sign. The world looked brighter, sharper. Carl clapped me on the back, his eyes suspiciously moist. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said. The aftermath wasn't a fairy tale. The legal victory didn't magically erase the debts I'd incurred, fixing the place up, nor did it plant the fields for me. The emotional scars of Ethan's betrayal remained, a dull ache that I knew I would carry for a long time. Viridian filed an appeal, which was quickly dismissed, and then turned their legal fury on Ethan, who, as far as I knew, was still a ghost in the wind. His problems were his own now, but something fundamental had shifted. The farm was no longer a battleground. It was simply home. The work wasn't a struggle, it was a joy. Waking up to the sunrise over my own fields, feeling the solid earth under my feet, knowing that I was the caretaker my grandmother believed me to be. That was a victory greater than any court could grant. My inheritance, I realized, was never really about the land itself. The land was just the vessel. The true inheritance was the lesson she had buried in the floorboards for me to find. It was the strength to fight for your own story. It was the courage to choose the harder right over the easier wrong. It was the understanding that home isn't just a place you are given, but a place you choose to build, to protect, and to pour your heart into. My grandmother didn't just leave me a farm, she left me a choice. And we all get choices like that in ways big and small. The choice to accept the story we're told, or the choice to pick up a pry bar and dig for the truth. The choice to walk away from a fight that feels too big, or the choice to stand your ground even when you're shaking. What story are you fighting for? What truth are you trying to reclaim? I want you to tell me in the comments below, because your story matters. Every single one of them does. And if these kinds of stories, the ones about finding strength in the broken places, matter to you, then subscribe to the channel. Let's keep finding them and sharing them together. You're not alone in this.